It is almost superfluous to say that these meditations are not presented in suitable form and compass for use in the church at the 3 hours devotion on Good Friday. They are designed for a private use, and chiefly for persons who are prevented from attending a public service. It is hoped, however, that the clergy may find here suggestions for their discourses. The greater part of the matter has actually been used by the author for his Good Friday meditations, but the studies which are here offered are not appropriate to Good Friday alone. They touch on many sides the profoundest problems of the Christian faith, and apart from the literary setting in which they are here introduced, they are relevant to many another season of the church year. The book is not a mere monograph upon the joy of the cross, though the title indicates a predominant and pervading theme, one which is too commonly ignored, and upon which it is always wholesome to reflect. Many and various subjects have crept into this book which were no part of the original plan, for the writing of it proved a suggestive opportunity for an essay in unsystematic theology, a sort of theology which is now needed, and which alone is now possible. Those problems in particular which are forced upon us by the suffering and death of Christ cannot profitably be contemplated except with such sympathy as this time and this mode of treatment engender. The freezing reason's colder part is never so inept as when it is applied to Christ's suffering death. We cannot afford to treat this tragedy only as a formal topic in a logical system. The larger aim explains the greater size of this book, which is at the same time more concise and perhaps more technical than the title might lead one to expect. The author has endeavored to gather together and present here in popular form, unsystematically yet not without consistency and precision, some of the latest and most reliable results of gospel study. In a few cases, authorities are expressly cited for the sake either of justifying the author from the reproach of originality, or of supplying proof which cannot readily be introduced in a popular work. It may not be impertinent to remark that this book is written from the standpoint of modern historical scholarship. It may therefore appeal to some who are repelled by the dogmatic attitude. May it also confirm them in the faith that Jesus is the Lord. W.L. Keene Valley in the Adirondacks, September 1904. Note on the frontispiece. The substance of what I have endeavored to say in this little book with regard to the significance of the cross in our Christian meditation is expressed graphically to the eye in the frontispiece, which represents a small panel from the wooden doors of the church of St. Sabina at Rome, executed probably at the beginning of the 5th century. The theme is unique in Christian art, but it is thoroughly consonant with early Christian ideals. To us the ideal and the manner of its presentation are alike strange, and require a word of interpretation. The church is symbolized by a veiled woman in the attitude of prayer. She gazes upward at the cross, which the apostles Peter and Paul hold before her eyes. See Galatians 3:1. They hold it not straight before her, as though it were level with her attainment, but above her at their utmost reach, at the highest object of her aspiration. The cross here is the equal-armed cross, which had long been associated with the triumph of Christ's faith, and it is framed in a wreath or crown, the crown which is forevermore associated with the cross. The singular thing is that the staff of the cross is elongated upwards as by a tongue of flame. It points beyond the sun, the moon, the stars, and the vault of heaven to Christ, ascended, glorified, triumphant. The gaze of the church is not to rest upon the cross, but is directed through it to the Lord of glory, the Alpha and Omega, from beneath whose feet issues the fourfold river of life, who is glorified by the 4 angelic beasts of the Apocalypse, and stands in an attitude of more than royal grace, the teacher and the ruler of the world. The mystic scroll which he holds in his left hand bears the Greek letters which spell fish, ichthus, and taken as an acrostic reads Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. The design which decorates the cover of this book is copied from a beautiful stone relief of the 4th century, now in the Lateran Museum. It is to be noted that this represents the cross as well as the monogram of Christ, and is well nigh the only form in which the cross was depicted for a century or more after Constantine. Forward. The symbol of our faith is a cross, not a crucifix. We dare not forget today that we venerate an empty cross. It is empty forever of that burden which once hung there, tortured, dying, dead. And banished too is that blankness of despair, that sad dismay and disillusion with which it was veiled until the first Easter morning. The cross, not the crucifix, is the symbol of Christianity. The tomb also is empty. We worship a risen Christ, an ascended Lord. Not even upon this day dare we say, it is Christ that died, without adding with St. Paul, yea, rather, that was raised from the dead. We should be false to the solemn sincerity of this memorial day if, with histrionic artifice, we should pretend to sorrow as the friends of Jesus once sorrowed when they had no hope, as the mother sorrowed, and St. John, or those others who forsook and fled, who had hoped, but could hope no more, that it was he which should redeem Israel. Today it is true we dwell especially upon the act of sacrifice, and upon Christ as victim. And it is not strange if we find ourselves impotent, I do not say to compass by the intellect this mystery, but to rise in feeling to the height of this tragedy, as we have felt or failed to feel upon the Athenian Acropolis, on the fields of Marathon, or at Rome, so now upon Mount Calvary. Our human sensibilities, once pressed beyond their meager range, recoil, react, and we stand futile, dumb, indifferent before what most should move us to wonder, joy, or grief. So stood St. John beside the cross, replete with too much woe, as he is represented with just feeling in a famous picture of Muncases, the beloved disciple himself, and beside the cross, yet as remote in spirit from that tragedy as those others who forsook and fled. So we stand today. It is unavailing, it is worse than in vain, for us to strive to harrow up our feelings by the rehearsal of every wound of Jesus. The desire to put our finger into the prints of the nails, and our hand in his side, is in us, as in St. Thomas, a sign of our unbelief in the spiritual Christ, the Lord who is the Spirit. The risen Christ we may no longer call Rabboni, therefore he saith, Touch me not. We do not forget that men need the fire of strong emotion to fuse their good intentions into an effective resolution, but we also may not forget what the sober traditions of our race and of our Reformed religion should teach us, that the divine sacrifice is not made more significant by frantic effort to taste the details of slaughter. This indulgence and profanation is forbidden us, not only by our traditions, but by all that is sincerest, strongest, and most primitive in the example of the Church Universal. Few pictures of Fra Angelico's are better known than two crucifixions in the convent of San Marco. Why is it that in both of them the pious friar has sketched the burden upon the cross so crudely that the eye cannot dwell upon it, but is forced to sink to the figures below, upon which he has expended the utmost of his art? It is because he knew that this mystery is not to be apprehended by fixing it with a bold gaze and steadfast stare, but with half-averted eye, as one sees best the faintest stars. And so the painter bids us read its meaning in the upturned face of Dominic, or, in the greater fresco of the chapter room, in the lives of the monks and martyrs of all ages grouped beneath the cross. Fra Angelico is here true to the spirit, though he breaks the letter of the primitive precept which forbade any representation of the crucified. This anniversary of Christ's sacrifice was worthily celebrated for nearly 600 years before anyone presumed to depict the crucifixion, and not for several centuries more was there tolerated such a thing as the representation of a suffering, a naked, a dead Christ Even the cross itself was never pictured to the eye during the first 3 centuries, and when it emerged in Christian use it was not in its realistic form as the instrument of death, but as the symbol of victory and as the tree of life. Even this day is a festal day upon which we commemorate not so much the death of Jesus as the work of our redemption. Or is it only an irony that we call it Good Friday? And does there still cleave to it in our minds the notion of ill luck, as though today a work had been unpropitiously commenced rather than victoriously accomplished? The crucifixion and death of Christ may justly be regarded as the lowest step of his humiliation. So St. Paul regards it. Yet he never for a moment forgets that he that descended is the same also that ascended far above all heavens, that he might fill all things. And in the 2nd chapter of his epistle to the Philippians, where he most expressly develops the theme of Christ's humiliation, he also most expressly notes that this lowliest step proved the way to glory. Jesus made the vast descent from heaven to earth, from creator to creature, and again within the human sphere he descended to the lowliest human condition, to death itself, the common humiliation of men, and that in its uncommon and most shameful form, upon the cross. But this lowest step brings us with a full force of moral demonstration to the triumphant wherefore God also highly exalted him, and that name which has been made glorious above every name is chiefly glorious because it is the memorial of his humiliation and the symbol of his loving service. Plainly, therefore, St. John is in the right when he interprets the crucifixion of Christ not as a humiliation, but as the conclusive and consummating glory of Jesus' revelation of the divine love. There are 2 aspects which we may distinguish in the crucifixion, but it is a dull and obtuse mind which must divide in order to distinguish. Must we have nothing but sorrow today, and reserve all the joy for Easter? It was not so in the earliest time. In the beginning, this day of the Passion was also Easter Day, the Christian Passover, a single anniversary of the whole act of redemption. And even when the Sunday festival was distinguished from it, this Friday celebration did not for a long time lose all trace of its solemn gladness. It was the gloom of the Middle Ages which perverted it. We are more in harmony with the early than with the later Church of Rome when we appropriate the words of St. Leo, Roman Pontiff and also Church Father, which he uttered in his sermon upon the Passion, delivered on the Sunday which precedes this day. Desired by us and dear to the whole world, the festival of the Sunday of the Passion is at hand, which in the exaltation of spiritual joys suffers us not to be silent. These words suggest another paradox with which this anniversary confronts us. Not now the question whether grief or gladness, but whether speech or silence best comports with the day. And so St. Leo pertinently goes on to say, wherefore, although it is difficult wisely, worthily, and aptly to discourse on this solemnity, nevertheless the priest is not free to deprive the people of the office of the sermon, in respect to so great a mystery of divine mercy, since the very fact of it, unutterable as it is, bestows the faculty of speech, nor can that which is said be deficient, while it is never possible to say enough. The senses labor, genius flags, eloquence fails. Well it is for us that to be duly sensible of the Lord's majesty is not required of us. Standing today on Mount Calvary, we may well remember that heavenly voice which came to the disciples on the mountain of Transfiguration. This is my beloved Son, hear him. Today we would listen to no other voice. There must be a sermon. We had rather it were not quite a sermon, but something between speech and silence, a meditation, but a meditation in which we all of us join, and in which, therefore, we need to be led by a common suggestion through the spoken word. Today it needs no din of the voice to catch our ears, and no stirring appeal to touch our hearts, as in all the quietness of thought we listen to the 7 words from the cross. It is fanciful of us, I know, to take for our guidance just these 7 words which we gather from the several evangelists. But such chance guidance suits the mood in which we are fain to put away from us the rigor of logical system. When we stand before the incomprehensible, we most are fain to symbolize, to speak as a child, with the implicit confession that we know only in part. Again I say, we gaze today at a cross which is not black with dread and disillusion, but radiant with a new teaching, a new hope, a new life. And we come in its light and peace to listen if the risen Christ will speak some word to us from out the glory, some sin uncloak, some stricter rule command. We may take as the motto of our whole meditation upon the crucifixion a word which St. John records as the foreword of the Passion, spoken in full prospect of the cross. Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. John 13:31. End of section 1.